Join women passionate about agriculture and food at the upcoming Advancing Women in Agriculture Conference being held on March 16th through 18th, 2025 at the Hyatt Regency in Calgary, Alberta. Re-energize and re-engage while listening to leaders in the food and agriculture industry tell their stories. Network and make connections while learning tips that will help you meet your goals. For more information and to register, head to the link in today's show notes. Hi, I'm Caitlin Dubin, and this is the Rural Woman Podcast. I'm a first-generation farmer who married into agriculture. Born and raised in a city, I was so unfamiliar with where my food came from, but I was determined to figure it out. Through my journey into agriculture, I saw women who were strong but humble, often taking a back seat. To me, these women were leaders who deserved a seat at the table. I created the Rural Woman Podcast to share the voices of women in an industry whose stories often went untold. The rural entrepreneurs who live and breathe their work, full of grit and pride. We come here to share our stories, to be in community with each other, to be challenged and inspired, but most importantly, to be celebrated and to be heard. We may not all live, farm, ranch, or homestead the same, but we are all connected. We are rural women, and our stories are worthy of being told. Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of the Rural Woman Podcast. Today you'll meet Chelsea McKen. Chelsea was born and raised in the Alberta Peace Country. She comes from a family with deep agricultural roots dating back to her great-grandfather's homestead. After purchasing the family farm with her husband, Chelsea transitioned to vegetable farming and started a small-scale operation, expanding it over time with a CSA program, a pumpkin patch, and plans for you-pick Christmas trees. As the main grower, she spends her winters planting and starting seeds, while her summers are filled with planting, growing, and harvesting crops. Can't wait for you to meet Chelsea and hear her story. But before we get to her interview, I just want to say a quick hello and the warmest welcome to our newest Patreon member, Nicole Z. Nicole is our newest Barn Brew buddy over on Patreon, so she gets ad-free episodes, extended episodes, as well as my solo podcast, Maybe You Can Relate. So welcome. Thank you so much for your support. And if you would like to support the Rural Woman Podcast financially, you can head on over to patreon.com/the Rural Woman Podcast and learn more about all of the perks that are offered with each tier. Without further ado, my friends, let's get to this week's episode with Chelsea McKen. Chelsea, welcome to the Rural Woman Podcast. How are you today?
I am good. Thank you for having me.
I am so excited you're here to learn all about you and to share your story with our audience. So for the folks who are unfamiliar with you, Chelsea, tell us who you are, where you're from, and how you got your start in agriculture.
So my name is Chelsea McKen. I am one of the owners of PC Ranch. We are in northern Alberta we're outside of Grimshaw, but I like to say Peace River because more people know Peace River than Grimshaw. So if I go way back to the beginning, my great-grandfather homesteaded the land in 1911, and he farmed by himself for several years until he met my great-grandma. And they got married, started having kids, and they built the house that we actually live in still right now. And my mother and my grandpa were also raised in this house, so it's pretty cool to be here. So they grain farmed, and my great-grandma actually brought in the animals. I guess she was the animal lover, and if my great-grandfather had it his way, he would have just stuck to grain, but she brought in the hogs and chickens and geese and everything. So my great-grandfather passed away when the kids were quite young, and so my great-grandmother kept the farm going by herself with the help of her kids for several years until my grandpa took over in 1960. And him and my grandma grain farmed and raised Simmental cattle. So they did that for many years. And then they offered the farm to us, a subdivided acreage of the farm to us in 2014. We purchased that, my husband and I, in 2014, and we were growing in the already established garden here, and we had so much extra produce, we were giving it away. A few people suggested that we start selling the produce, so we were just selling to friends and family at first. In 2017, I had my son, and I was looking for a way to make an income from home. So I was researching, and the CSA model popped up, and so I did a lot of research on that and spoke with other producers that were running CSAs. And so we did a test run in 2018. We did it half price with a handful of people just to work out the kinks. And then from there, we've slowly added more spaces to our program each year and added a pumpkin patch and our Christmas tree farm. And here we are.
Here you are.
Yeah.
So if I'm doing the math right, you are the third generation to be growing on this farm.
Yes. None of my grandparents' kids, sorry, they never farmed. But yeah, so we're farming, but in a little different way. But yeah.
Yeah. So did you grow up in town then, or did you grow up near the farm?
I grew up just across the field from the farm. And so I spent a lot of time here growing up. The bus would drop me off after school. And I spent so much time here that I had my own set of coveralls and chore clothes for after school chores. And I spent a lot of time in the summer here. My grandma had a big garden, and she actually had little plots for all the grandkids so we could grow what we wanted in our own little space in the garden. So we lived on an acreage and not on the farm. I spent as much time as I could here.
Right. So was it ever a thing for you that you thought, like, I'm going to grow up and be a farmer on this multi-generation farm, or did you have other plans?
Well, I had always somehow been connected to agriculture. I used to teach riding lessons, and I got my equine first aid certificate and was involved in the horse world for a while. I never necessarily had plans to be a vegetable farmer, but I knew I always wanted to be in ag. I was always drawn to it. I was in an office job before this, and when I was on my mat leave with my son, it kind of solidified that I wanted to be here and do something on the farm. And so we found a way to do that with what we have. We don't have a whole bunch of land. We're on 15 acres. So we're kind of trying to, do what we can with what we have.
That's amazing. I love the story that your grandma had small plots for the grandkids to grow their own veggies, and obviously sparked something in you to grow up to be a vegetable farmer.
Yeah.
Are your grandparents still with us today?
Unfortunately not, but I do have my grandma's old gardening journal, and so we can see some of the old plots where she'd put, Chelsea's garden, and I had sunflowers and potatoes, etc. So yeah, it's pretty cool to have those memories.
Those are neat. And I love the sentimental value of farming in general and generational farming when it comes to finding those old treasures of whether it's a gardening journal or a notebook that somebody wrote down what the weather on the second Tuesday of harvest was. And to see those things, those are really those feel good, sentimental things that I think make our industry pretty special.
Yes, for sure. Yeah.
So you started this CSA, I would say, at a time, obviously, before a lot of the world knew what a CSA was. The world being the general population in 2020, when there was no vegetables in the grocery store, looking to farmers and CSA. So what was the reaction from your community back then in 2018 and the 2017 season when you were trying out this new to you method?
Well, everyone was really supportive. There was not very many CSAs in our area. There was one in previous years before I had started, but she had moved away, so there was nobody in our area who was doing the CSA. So actually, when I had advertised that we were just doing a test run, we had so many people, and I had to I had to limit it, put a wait list on. So everybody was really curious about it and wanted to get in on it. And yeah, everybody's been super supportive. Every year we have a wait list, and I wish it could open up more spots, but we have to keep it at a certain threshold of what we can handle as a family. So it was quite amazing to see how passionate people were about supporting local farmers and young farming families, and kind of trying to find out where their food was coming from, how it was grown. So yeah, it was quite refreshing to see how many people were interested in it at first.
Right. Can you share with us any growing pains, the pun is intended, of starting a CSA and what that's looked like for you?
Yeah, there's been a lot of trial and error, figuring out the best storage methods, the best transportation methods, whether it's easier for us and for our customers to pick up from the farm or from a pickup point in town or have it delivered. So we've kind of worked through that through the years, different CSA sizes, like the share sizes. The nice thing about the CSA is that you can kind of mold it to fit how you want, fit your farm and fit your community and your customers. So we've done a few different things, and we've kind of found our rhythm now. But yeah, there's always, I mean, besides all of the logistics of it, there's also the growing part of it. And so some years are tougher than others. This past year was a really hard year growing wise. It was a cold spring. We had a killing frost late June. So it was a difficult year. But yeah, so working through all of that can definitely be challenging.
Well, and you're doing something, I think that, obviously it can be intimidating starting a new business and, doing something that's absolutely new for you and your farming family to see. Talk to me about imposter syndrome and what that's looked like for you as a female farmer.
Yes, I've definitely struggled with that over the years. Being a small scale farmer, sometimes you feel like, kind of silly calling yourself a farmer when you're farming under 2 acres of land. So I've kind of had to overcome that. And, you're not the typical image of what people think of when they think of a farmer. So kind of almost having felt like I had to prove myself sometimes. I am the main grower on our farm. My husband works off the farm long hours. So I'm kind of the main person. He helps with all the background stuff, the irrigation and fixing and that stuff, and he's a huge help. But for me, being the face of the farm I definitely have felt like I've had to prove myself a little bit in some situations. But at the end of the day, I'm planting, growing, producing this food for families, and it's been very rewarding.
I have had this logistical conversation with myself and other people. And it's always like, do you grow something that you eat? Yes. Do you sell that to somebody? Yes. Okay. So then by definition,
Yeah.
you are a food producer and a farmer, right? And I always find it so interesting because, and this can go down a whole rabbit hole, if your husband was the main producer, he would likely call himself a farmer with less of that underlying, like, well, am I a farmer because I don't have enough land to call myself a farmer or XYZ? It sounds so silly when we say it out loud,
Yes.
but I know the feeling deep down inside.
Yeah, it takes a lot to, get over that feeling, and because it can hold you back a bit. Kind of, you don't want to, step out of your comfort zone. You're like, well, I'm not a farmer, so maybe I shouldn't go. I've been asked to do a few, gardening talks and things locally, and I'm like, well, I don't know, am I the right person for that? But yeah, getting over that and just sharing our experience and our story and stuff. So yeah.
Well, and thank you for sharing that with me. And, it's funny, like I have those conversations to this day that I still have that imposter syndrome myself. And it's like, I have a proven track record of X, Y, and Z, but I'm still sitting here being like, I don't know, like, it's like,
Yes.
get over it. But it's also good to know that we all have those feelings and it's normal to have those feelings, but to work through them and to work through them with other people, I always think is a lot easier than sitting there being like, oh my God, what am I doing?
Yeah, exactly.
So in the growth of your CSA and of your farm and your customer base, you've actually invited the community to really be a part of your farm. So can you talk to us about some of the events that you've had over the years at the farm?
Yes, so in 2022 was the first year we had our You Pick pumpkin patch. And there's not really pumpkin patches up here. We have such a short growing season that it's kind of tricky to get pumpkins like to the stage where they're ready in time before we get a frost. But so we thought we'd give it a try, and the first year was very successful, and we had people come out, and it was just so fun to see, especially the kids going and finding a pumpkin, and they're just so excited about it, and seeing families come out and enjoy our space and enjoy finding fun pumpkins and taking pictures. So after that, it's kind of grown a little bit. We had a pumpkin patch in 2023 again, and then this past summer I kind of had the idea to have yoga in the garden. I thought it would be kind of fun. The garden for me is such a peaceful place. It's almost meditative, and I thought, well, it's a perfect spot for yoga. So I'd reached out looking to see if there was any instructors interested, and someone contacted me, and we set it up. And yeah, we just had one session this summer, but hopefully we'll have a few more next year as well. It was the perfect day for it, and we got lots of compliments after that. Everybody really enjoyed being out in the evening sun by the garden, and the animals were out visiting everybody as they were trying to do their stretches. And yeah, it was just a really nice day. And we had my friend who's a nutritionist, to make some juice for everybody out of our vegetables. So everybody had a juice shot after their yoga session. And yeah, it was just really nice to bring in people and enjoy our space with us. And yeah.
I love when we are able to bring people to our spaces that bring us peace and joy. And I think, when you live rurally and when you live out of a city center, even a town center, we can easily forget that people don't get to wake up and see the sunrise or see the sunset the way that we do. And to be able to invite people to these spaces is super fun. And obviously, being able to come out and stretch and all of those things, those are also feel good endorphins. And yeah, so that's awesome. Tell me more about the Christmas trees.
Well, yeah, my husband kind of makes fun of me sometimes because I have this obsession with fall and Christmas, but they've kind of are turning into these little business endeavors. So the Christmas tree farm, I just had this idea that it would just be to create a nice, cozy environment for people to come pick a tree. In my vision, we just planted the trees this past spring, so this is a few years off, but I have a vision of, having a fire going and Christmas music playing and Christmas lights up, and just another opportunity for people to come out and enjoy the space and get together and pick your Christmas tree, have the kids out, just have just a feel good event for people to come out and enjoy.
Yeah. And what a perfect idea to really extend your growing season in a way that you can't do with vegetables.
Yes. Yeah. Well, that's exactly it. It's kind of like a supplement to the CSA. Our CSA is the bread and butter of the farm, but the pumpkin patch and the Christmas trees are kind of a supplement to add to it. So.
Join women passionate about agriculture and food at the upcoming Advancing Women in Agriculture Conference being held on March 16th through 18th at the Hyatt Regency in Calgary, Alberta. The Advancing Women in Agriculture Conference is created for every woman who is passionate about agriculture and food, whether you are a university student studying agriculture, a producer, entrepreneur, representative of a growers association, or corporate agribusiness. AWC has a proven track record of bringing women in agriculture and food together from across Canada and parts of the U.S. AWC is proud of the quality of speakers that are brought to the podium, including business experts, motivational and inspirational leaders, industry representatives, and farmers just like you. I'll be there hosting mini interviews at the AWC 2025 West Conference. So join us in sharing your story as well as learning from other amazing women in agriculture. For more information and to register, head to advancingwomenconference.ca or the link in today's show notes. So with the pandemic and, with the search, I guess, for local food, were there other CSAs that have popped up in your area since?
There's not a whole bunch. I think there might have been one or two in our area, but there's not a whole lot. It seems to be like there's more veggie people coming to the farmers markets and stuff, but I believe there are two other CSAs that have since started in the area. So it definitely feels like people are looking more for the local food and, farm to table food.
Right.
So yeah.
Which, regardless, is a good thing, because I always feel like the more the merrier when it comes to local food. And I always feel like there's such opportunities for other farms to work together, to work smarter, not harder, and still provide their community with local food. And I feel like a majority of the people that look to starting CSAs or farm to table, that is essentially their main drive, is to push people towards farm to table.
Yeah, like our original goal was to have a vegetable CSA and also raise pigs and chickens for meat to be able to add into the CSA and have laying hens. But throughout the years, I've kind of found out that I just can't do it all. It's just too much. So last year we worked with a local farm to add beef to our boxes. And it's something that I'd like to explore more, maybe bring in some preserves to the CSA boxes, baking, eggs, meat, that kind of thing. Be able to work together with other farms to be able to bring people more local food more conveniently.
And I love what you said. I found out that I couldn't do it all.
Yeah.
Shocker, right? We all hear those things, but until you experience that you can't do it all,
Yeah, I don't like. I can't have a 2-acre garden plus pigs plus chickens plus kids. It's just too much.
Yeah, if you value sleep and or really anything else besides working, you should probably look at different options.
Exactly.
You've mentioned a few times about growing season. I'm curious to know, what growing zone are you located in? And can you walk us through what your typical year on the farm looks like?
So we are in growing zone 2. So typically our last frost is around May long weekends, maybe a little bit later. Usually people around here put their gardens in around May long weekends. Like I said, this year was a surprise when we got frosts into late June. But typically it's late May to beginning of September is usually when we get our first frost. Some years we've had frosts early as August 28th. Some years, like the last couple of years, we haven't had them till mid-September. They have a quite short growing season, usually a good 3 months. So we need to start most of our vegetables indoors in order for them to have enough time to mature outside. So it's usually we're packing right now. I don't have a greenhouse to start everything in, so it's all in my office on shelves with grow lights. So my office is upstairs. So there's a lot of back and forth packing trays and trays and trays out in the spring. But yes, that's what we have to do to ensure that we have our vegetables ready in time.
So typically, when are you starting to start your seeds for the next year?
So certain things like our celery and onions that take a bit longer, we're starting in February. And then kind of as the months go on, March, we're starting some of our brassicas like our cabbage, cauliflower, broccoli. And then April, we're starting some of our squash and stuff like that. Pumpkins, we try to wait till May to start. So usually in February we start, and then each month we add a few more things to the list to start. So
Right. After your season is done, like the CSA, the pumpkin patch, then we'll add the trees in later. But kind of when that is done, what are you doing for yourself that kind of gets you decompressed from your busy season?
Well, usually I try to take November to just not even think about the garden too much. Once we get everything cleaned up and put away, I try to take November, sometimes December, just to focus on family, on myself. I've recently started, with a fitness trainer to get back into the gym so I can keep that movement up in the winter. Sometimes it's a little bit tough to keep physically active in the winter. So trying to do stuff like that for myself and also furthering my education with it. I had enrolled in the Market Gardener's Master Class in 2019, and it's an ongoing course. So I refer back to that in the winter and kind of review everything, dig deeper into soil health and that kind of thing. That really interests me. So I try to take as many courses, webinars, whatever I can get my hands on for education.
Yeah, I think it's, for me, I know when we're done harvest and I can get off of that combine, I am ecstatic. I'm like, I don't want to go outside. I don't want to look at anything. But then after I would say less than a couple weeks, I'm kind of like, oh, did I go outside today besides feeding and watering the animals? And then I think to myself, okay, I need to like have that balance and finding that balance. And I hate the word balance because I'm just like, it is an ever moving target of where it can be. But reminding ourselves that, that movement and that sunlight is very necessary, especially when you live where we do.
Yeah. I know. Yeah. It's dark by 5:30 here now. So yeah,
Yep.
It's important to get outside when you can, for sure.
For everyone, we're recording this like less than a week after the time change. And I always laugh and say like, oh, the clock went back an hour and now we are in seasonal depression time zone.
Exactly. Yeah.
Tell me about your family and what they bring to the garden and the CSA. Tell me about the kiddos and what they're doing to help you in the garden.
Well, they are probably my biggest inspiration for growing clean, nutrient-dense produce. That's kind of how this whole thing started. I mean, I've always had a garden. My husband and I, even we lived in town before we bought the acreage, we had a garden. But then when they came along, it was definitely an inspiration to like, I want to nourish my family as much as I can. And that starts, in the soil. The healthier the soil, the healthier the produce, the healthier the people. So I always think of them, when I'm starting to feel overwhelmed and like, why am I doing this? Like, they're the reason I started so I could stay home as well, too, so I could be home with them and not go back to work in the office. So they're a good reminder of why I do what I do. And they're getting to the age now, they're 7 and 5, that they are a bit more helpful in the garden, too. They like to help me with the quality control. They like to taste test everything. So they're out there checking when the peas are ready and pulling carrots and making sure they're sweet enough. And yeah, so they've been helping. They help alongside us in the garden quite a bit.
I love that. I love seeing agriculture and farming and all of these things through the eyes of kids because they are so fascinated by what could be the most simple thing. I think I've shared this story a million times and I will keep sharing it. The very first time, it's like a kids' farm fair is essentially what it is. And they invite schools and young kids from all around our area to come and experience what it looks like to be on a farm. And it's at the exhibition grounds. And I wanted to go because there were people there that I wanted to talk to about goats, but I didn't feel like I could go there without a child and look like a weirdo. So I told my sister-in-law that we had to go. And so we could bring my nephew. And so he's walking around and there's animals and, there's different plants and stuff in there. But I will never forget when Mason made the connection between a chicken and an egg because we were sitting there and he saw a chicken and then he saw the egg. And I said, Mason, that's where eggs come from. And his mind was blown.
Oh, yeah, right.
And it was just like to have that experience as a kid, but to actually live and breathe it on a farm and to see like, I'm going to put this seed in the soil and in a few weeks, something's going to pop up. And then in a few more weeks, I get to eat something from it. Like, it's pretty cool.
Yeah, it's been pretty cool to see the kids learn, from all of the stages of the garden, from the planting to when things are just growing and we have to weed and water to what we get at the end of it. Actually, it was kind of funny because this spring, like our pumpkin patch, we didn't run this year because we got that killing frost and it pretty much wiped it all out and it was too late to restart. But my daughter had been She'd found this old rotten pumpkin in the scrap pile, and she picked all the seeds out of it, and she had planted it in this little planter in like April, and it got covered up with a bunch of stuff. And then we were cleaning up the yard, and she pulled this stuff off this planter, and there's this little pumpkin plant growing there. And actually, her plant did better than any of the ones that were covered out of our patch. But it's just so funny how kids, they just enjoy being in the garden and planting. And I tried to do the same tradition my grandma did with us and give them their own little space to kind of work with and plant their own veggies. And we've also had a working share program in our CSA where people get a discount off of their share, and then they come to the farm to help work a certain amount of hours. And so some of the people that came out had kids, and then to kind of see our kids showing their kids the chickens and them collecting eggs. It was like the most exciting thing in the world for a kid to find an egg out there and bring it up to us. And giving them the veggies out of the garden. They're all walking around eating carrots while the rest of us are working. It's pretty cool to see.
Yeah, it's so cool. So what is next for you and your farm?
Well, we'll continue on with our pumpkin patch and work on our Christmas tree farm and keep expanding our CSA. Like I said, we have to keep it at a certain amount of people to make it manageable for us, but we're looking into hiring a few people for this summer so we can expand a bit. And the goal is that one day my husband and I will both be able to work from the farm in the summer. So we're working towards that. That's our main goal, to be able to all work together from the farm as a family. So
yeah, that's amazing. Chelsea, it has been so great chatting with you today. My last question for you is, what is the most rewarding part about being a rural woman for you?
Oh, that's a tough question. There's so many things. I think just being here on the farm and raising our family here and, trying to make this little piece of land that we have better than when we found it. It's just rewarding to see my kids grow up here. It's rewarding to have people come up to me and say that, their kids have tried new vegetables because of our CSA, or, our vegetables are supporting their healthier lifestyle that they're trying to do, or they've had like the best cabbage ever they bought from us, that kind of thing. It's just very rewarding to be able to provide people with that and the connections that we make with people, swapping recipes and talking about different ways to preserve vegetables, and just, having the connections probably with people is super rewarding. The connections and, like I said, raising our kids here and just being out at the farm, it's also rewarding.
Right? It's hard to pick one thing. It is the hardest question I ask. Chelsea, for listeners who would like to connect with you after the show, where can they find you online?
They can visit our website, tcranch.ca. We're also on Instagram and Facebook as well.
Amazing. Okay, I have to ask you one more question. Why are you called TC Ranch?
Well, it kind of started as a joke between my husband and I, because his name is Terry, I'm Chelsea. We started calling it the T&C Ranch when we first moved here, just as a joke, because we're obviously not a ranch, and the name kind of
Vegetable Ranch.
Vegetable Ranch, yeah. And the name kind of stuck. We were looking, when I was officially starting, the CSA, I was kind of looking at different names and stuff, but everybody just kept calling us TC Ranch, and it just kind of stuck, so we went with it. Yeah.
Love that. It's a vegetable ranch.
It is, yeah.
Thank you again for sharing your story with us. I really appreciate it.
Well, thank you so much for having me.
Thanks for listening to the Rural Woman Podcast. The Rural Woman Podcast is more than just a podcast. We are a community. A huge thank you to the Rural Woman Podcast team, audio editor Max Hofer. A special thanks to our Patreon executive producers, Sarah Riedner from Happiness by the Acre and Carrie Munven from Blaystone Farms. To learn how you can become a Patreon executive producer or other ways to financially support the show, head on over to wildrosefarmer.com to learn more. Be sure to hit the follow or subscribe button wherever you listen to the podcast to get the latest episodes directly on your playlist. And if you are loving the show, please be sure to leave a rating and review on Apple Podcasts or any other platform that accepts ratings and reviews. You can connect with us on social media at The Rural Woman Podcast and with me at Wild Rose Farmer. One of the best ways you can support the show is by sharing it. Send this episode to a friend or share on your social media. Let's strengthen and amplify the voices of women in agriculture together. Until next time, my friend, keep sharing your story. Did you know that you can get this same great episode of the Rural Woman Podcast ad-free? I get it. Listening to ads during a podcast isn't always my favorite either. But in order to keep the lights and coffee pot on here at the Rural Woman Podcast Studios, they are necessary. I am so grateful to each and every one of my sponsors, but if you yourself would like to skip the ads while supporting the show, consider joining me over on Patreon. Patrons of the Rural Woman Podcast get ad-free episodes starting at Tier 5 on their podcast player of choice each week, plus some other great benefits. Find out more by heading to the link in today's show notes to learn how you can become a patron through Patreon.